we can't just accept that there's a back order, because all of a sudden we started seeing so many. And I'm like, we have to stop now. We have to look at how we're doing this, and we have to exhaust all efforts, because the other thing is how you communicate a back order to a clinician is super important.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
This week on Power Supply, we speak with Susie Collins, Director of Materials Management at Mountain Vista Medical Center. And we're going to be talking about back order management today with Susie, because she and I spoke a few weeks ago and she was describing this back order algorithm that she had created, because back order, that might have been a one-off issue 2 or 3 years ago, one that you had to deal with in a couple of big, instances, but now it's a way of life. And so everybody has to adapt their practices, and they have to figure out a way to be able to manage the day-to-day, not just the stress that mounts from it or deflecting inquiries from clinicians and surgeons who don't have the supplies that they need, but how do you just manage your own team? How do you have it where it's as effective as it can possibly be, and you know that you've done everything you possibly can? And that's what we're going to be talking about today, Hayes.
Yeah, well, Susie was wonderful. Honestly, she gave us a really good insight and perspective into what they do every single day, and they're dealing with back orders. And come on, enjoy and listen to her, because she's really, really good.
All right, we'll be right back after a short break with Susie Collins.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Susie Collins, Director of Materials Management at Florence Hospital, a campus of Mountain Vista Medical Center. And we're going to be talking about back orders. And boy, is this a very common conversation these days and a common challenge, Susie. And it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. I mean, really, the light at the end of the tunnel, I don't think I can see it. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Susie, why don't you just introduce yourself to the audience and maybe talk a little bit about your background in supply chain, and maybe, why you have so much passion for the industry.
I would love to. So I've actually been in the acute care market for almost 30 years. I actually started out as a sales rep selling surgical lights and tables, specialty head walls, and specialty storage, and did that for quite a few years. Ended up getting involved with a product called Space Tracks, which gave me the ability to start learning the inventory management side of the world, and really started my passion for supply chain. And I went from being a salesperson to consulting in hospitals. And once I got into the hospitals and I kind of started learning what I call the other side of the table, I just kind of slowly crept over and ended up getting the opportunity to become a director of supply chain at Honor Health in Scottsdale. And honestly, haven't looked back. It's been very awesome. And it's been really cool to have been on both sides of the table. And I've really learned things from both sides of the table. But I have to say, being on the hospital side and being able to really affect change has been just amazing. I really do love what I do every day. And I have a fantastic team at this hospital. And it makes me want to get up and go to work. even during COVID.
Yeah, it's so funny. I didn't know that about your vendor background after we had talked previously. And it's so funny. I went the other way. I was a nurse and then became a sales rep. And so I was going to use that same term. I was going to say, I love the fact that you sat on the other side of the table, because I have to think that that really just gives you insights that otherwise, not everybody necessarily has the opportunity to see.
Yeah, it really does. And it's really fun to share with a vendor that I've been a vendor, because they kind of go, oh, you might know those tactics. No. So it is fun, but it is good knowing their side of the world as well.
I was going to say, you would certainly understand the impact of quota, end of month, and all those type of things, don't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I literally had a vendor the other day put it in writing that she was just trying to get sales at the end of the month. And I'm like, sweetie, you're not supposed to put that in writing. I will not say who, but I was just like, no.
Not today. Hey, before we really jump in this, Susie, really get into all this on back orders and things, I'd love to ask you a question. We've had COVID here the last year and a half. Let's just say, COVID's over, behind us. What do you look forward to doing that you couldn't do before? It could be travel, it could be whatever. What is that?
I definitely am excited to be able to go out and watch a football game without worrying about who's around or what's around or mask or no mask, because big Notre Dame fan. Love my Broncos. So I think being able to be in that big of a crowd again without hesitation is something that will be outstanding.
Yeah, it's going to be fun when we all get back. So awesome.
So let's talk about some of the causes of back orders as we kick off this conversation, Susie. And, some of these causes of back orders, I feel like, kind of similar to those tactics, with the vendors, although they shouldn't always tell you that they're trying to close sales at the end of the month, right? There's some of that in the background. I feel like a lot of these causes were really unknown to a lot of people in supply chain. They just weren't as prevalent as now they've all of a sudden become. And just the awareness and the reasoning behind it. There was just a whole lot of explaining to do in general so that everybody could understand why they weren't able to get what they needed at a time when they needed it the most. Can you kind of run down some examples of those causes for us just to kind of get the conversation flowing?
You bet. I mean, obviously from when COVID first happened in February of last year, PPE was the very first thing, right? Obviously, PPE became very difficult to get in a matter of weeks, where we didn't expect to start seeing back orders potentially for months. The federal government, the Army, a lot of different folks started scooping up PPE, and it was within weeks that we all of a sudden realized we weren't going to be able to have it readily available. So there was just sheer demand. And then there was the fact that they couldn't manufacture fast enough. And many of the factories that especially make the paper products that you guys see in SPD, that we see in all of the wrapping, the custom packs, everything like that, the primary factory was in Wuhan. So they were already seeing delays due to the fact that they had people out. So you had people out of factories. So we had all of the natural back orders that happened just purely from the PPE standpoint. But then within a few months of COVID, so probably by, I would say, May, was when we started seeing other things beyond PPE. And it was significant. It was everything from a Foley catheter to some of our cement products, right? It started to be anything it felt like that had plastic. And we're still seeing that, right? So all of a sudden, it wasn't just that we had fears about being able to have enough PPE. All of a sudden, we were starting to question if we were going to have products to take care of the patients. And we really haven't seen that improve at all. At all. We expect the gloves still. We expect, gowns and stuff, a lot of that starting to come back to a more normal pattern. But for instance, right now, again, Foley kits are on back order again. And I think part of that is there's probably three major things. One, we have seen some significant mergers that all were kind of quietly happening during COVID, but BD buying Bard. Any companies, when they come together like that, they're going to be going after SKU reductions. They're going to be wanting to improve their profitability. And I think that they kind of slowed down some of their production numbers because they wanted to play it safe. But the demand has been out there. We, in Arizona, we didn't see our normal decline of patients in the summer. We have stayed consistently busy. So I think that their planning hasn't been probably as appropriate. And then components. A manufacturer might have 30 parts, but that 31st part, maybe he wasn't able to get for whatever reason. And now that entire production is being held up. We've also seen with Boston Scientific, a lot of their urology products, they're based in Indiana. They literally said there weren't factory workers because they could stay home and make the same money. So they didn't literally have the factory workers available to build the products. So all of a sudden they started back ordering everything from, the ureter baskets to stents. And we're suddenly scrambling. And it seems like every week we're facing something different. And a lot of it is they either don't have it or they're not being able to produce it enough. D&C tubing, really difficult to get. And there's only a few companies that even make it. So when the one company that makes it that was having all the back orders, they were back ordering to multiple vendors. So we can't even scramble to try to get it from somebody else because there's really only one true source who's making it. So I think a lot of those things I think they used to be able to hide it better before, but, we've seen a lot more people get sick since COVID started, and not with COVID, but, the general overall health, because so many people kind of stayed in their houses, became more sedentary, weren't out being active. That's hurting that, over 65 demographic out there. We're seeing more sick people. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think manufacturers, quite honestly, are planning aggressively enough for the demand in the country.
Susie, really, really good comments and taking us down a road that I think our listeners are wanting to hear. One of the things that I heard you mention is the players, the manufacturers, the vendors, the true partners of this. You talk about back order reports. The worst thing you want to hear is all of a sudden it just shows up and then nobody helps you with it. You're searching. You're trying to go find it, like PPE. Where can we get it? That was a giant issue. But in reference to just those key stakeholders, what is a true partnership? What does that look like in your world from a vendor's perspective or a manufacturer's perspective or a distributor? What does a really, really true business partnership look like that's supporting your endeavors to take care of the patient ultimately?
So the first thing I'm going to say, and I do have vendors that do this, is the vendor that's going to reach out to me and warn me before it's a problem. And I know that's hard, and I've only had a few who have done it effectively, but giving me that warning, right? Giving me the heads up, helping me plan. Maybe they know my pattern of business, and I get it. There's 4,200 acute care facilities in the country, so I know they can't do that for everybody, but I think them being more transparent is really important. And then honestly, offering up a suggestion. And I think that's where we kind of talked about the algorithm that I built for dealing with back orders. And it literally, I had to point out, if the customer service rep tells you it's on back order, we can't just accept that. We have to ask more probing questions. We have to go down that path. But it's like they don't want to give any information out. They just want us to go, oh, okay, it's back ordered and you don't have a date. Thank you. And we can't do that because we have to have more information in order to plan. That's, I think, what we need more of at this point is transparency and a heads up.
Yeah. it's not just about being proactive. I like the part that you added, some recommendations or some advice around planning, right? And you did mention your algorithm or your decision tree for back orders, and you were graciously willing to share that with us. And we're going to upload it to our smartphone app for iPhone and Android as bonus content to help everybody out there. So I want to thank you for sharing that, with the audience, but you really did just say something that's really, really key is sometimes anybody who manufactures anything, it doesn't even have to be in healthcare, right? It's just trying to manage having enough supply, but not having enough waste and et cetera. But the planning really is very much just like we all live our lives, right? And we just have it very much like in what we do and what we live day to day. But I think you're right. I think that what we've learned from the emergency preparedness and disaster planning that's come out of all this is that from our suppliers, we're going to need more of that. Hey, you know how to take care of you, but we need to know how do we react to this with long-term planning? Because we can't just all be sitting around fighting each other for the limited amount of supplies that there are.
Right. Well, and it's, for instance, and it's been confusing. Again, I'm going to use as the example. They've been back ordering so much stuff for the last 6 months, and I feel like they're not really learning from it. So it's either that they feel like they can't change it or they're just not willing to change. And we have a good rep and she does make suggestions, but it's an important product to have in your hospital. Everything related to urology is really key for a lot of different reasons. And it's stressful. It's stressful for our nurses when we have to make a switch. It's stressful when we don't have what they're used to using. That muscle memory is important to a nurse. So when we give them a different shaped kit or a different size option, that doesn't give them warm fuzzies. And honestly, I think that, they talk about alarm fatigue. I think nurses have backorder fatigue. They are sick of hearing us say it. And I almost feel guilty for saying it again because I almost don't believe me, but it is what's happening. And they don't want to hear it anymore. We don't want to say it anymore, but nothing really seems to be changing. I feel like we haven't learned anything in the last 6 months. It doesn't seem to be getting better.
And Susie, you bring up a really good point too, is the internal key stakeholder. Sometimes you don't have time to take it through a value clinical analysis evaluation, especially with PPE. How are you managing that with that fatigue? That's a whole nother piece of it. Oh my gosh, we got a brand new product. It's on back order. We got a min-max level, inventory controls. We're getting something in and things are moving so fast. It used to be lowest unit of measure. It doesn't seem like that's the direction anymore. How do you get those past the end users? What are some key takeaways you can give to listeners to get it through as quick as possible with some of these back order issues?
So again, we have to rely first on our vendors. Have they made a recommendation? Can they put it in writing? There are times they're even recommending their competitive product because they have to. So I think we start with them. Otherwise, we have to go to either our director or, depending on what it is, I'll take it to the CNO. If I don't want to have 8 different opinions, I may take it directly to the CNO and say, here's where we're at. We had to do that with needles. We couldn't get our normal safety needle, so we had to get a different version. And, again, that's a change. There's muscle memory to the needles that they use. So we may take something to the CNO, and there's some things, honestly, we've just had to put out. I hate to say that, but we literally, there's things that we haven't had a choice. Exam gloves is a great example. We literally will use whatever we can get. So we've purchased some, we get some bulk from our corporate. We've gotten some donated. We've gotten some donated from the state, and often they're not always the highest quality. So the nurses aren't necessarily happy with them, but we don't have a choice. We don't have something else to give them. So there's some things that we've just had to put on the shelf and say, we're sorry. We wish we could do better, but we can't right now.
So what does that wind up doing for the environment that you're working in, right? Definitely understand the nurse's reaction to it and the pressure that it's putting, but all of a sudden, they're in the offices, or in some cases, people working from home who are working in supply chain in many states. But what is that environment like? As this pressure starts to mount from lack of supplies and you're doing the best that you can, like the team that you lead, how does that impact your ability to lead them?
Yeah. It's, you have to try to remind them that we can only affect change where we can affect change. And that I think the most important thing that I've learned and my team has learned in the last 18 months is communication. We cannot over communicate. We have to just be, and we have to be transparent. We have to communicate the issues. We have to try to involve the reps and have the reps, share in the burden of informing the end user. So, for instance, with my stent, with a urology stent, I'm like, guess who's going to tell Dr. So-and-so that you don't have those? Because it's not going to be me.
I love that
you
part.
You get to make that phone call. So, we just have to, it's that constant communication. And we've created boards, we've created stickers, again, we have the algorithm. So we are just trying to communicate as much as possible. And not that we didn't have to communicate before, but it just feels like we had like a back order 2 years ago wasn't so stressful. You usually could find something. But, the other thing, again, and I think a lot of hospitals are full like we are. The minute there's a back order, whatever they're suggesting, there's a really good chance that's also on back order. And so you're just scrambling, trying all the different avenues to see if you have it. And then we as steward, we have a centralized warehouse. So if a hospital has overstock, we actually send it to a centralized warehouse so that other sites have opportunity to pull from it. So we try that as an avenue. We try other sites, can you share? But it used to be you could resolve a back order very quickly, and now it's just so much more time consuming. So their days are longer, and I think it just gets, again, like alarm fatigue. You're just like, oh, another back order.
Again. Yeah, we just had a conversation with Corey Turner about consolidated service centers. And, a big part of that was talking about how difficult it was during the pandemic when you had all these back orders of finding that overstock and getting it back, to a location, not always centralized, but centralized in your story, where you could then redistribute it where it was needed. And actually, I almost look at it like you're mining for supplies. And so I think that's the difference. Was you were on back order before, and part of the reason it wasn't so stressful is you might have been on back order with something that you did have some overstock on, and so you were kind of handling it. But we got to a point where we hit critical mass, and so anything that was back ordered became more of an extra effort to try to go find supplies. And at the same time, you had lots of people that weren't working on site. So you might have had less resources to go identify those supplies, or you might have been asking people like nurses, like myself, to go find those supplies, and they're not really, skilled in doing that or tracking it or helping execute that flow. And, it's kind of out of their wheelhouse. So I can see where that was so difficult. Is that what caused you to create the algorithm, was to create a better process for everybody to just kind of be able to act without everybody trying to figure it out?
Yeah, well, I think it was, I think we reached a point where I had to make it very systematic, if you will, that you can't just take no. We can't just accept that there's a back order, because all of a sudden we started seeing so many. And I'm like, we have to stop now. We have to look at how we're doing this, and we have to exhaust all efforts, because the other thing is how you communicate a back order to a clinician is super important. So if they hear that there's a back order before you can give them any other answers, you're just upsetting them too quickly, right? So I wanted to make sure with the algorithm that we had all of the information that we could possibly had. We exhausted all efforts before we had to say we can't get it. At least if we did all of that and then we were saying that, I had confidence that we could inform the clinicians, inform the physicians, and then come up with the next plan. Because for some of this stuff, it meant, are we going to be able to do this type of case? Because then it's a bigger decision. And I couldn't let that happen and have things, quite honestly, flow up to the C-suite without knowing that we had done all of our due diligence.
Of course. Let me ask you this, Susie. Obviously, a year ago, we were in the middle of the pandemic. Now we're kind of on the tail end, hopefully. But what percentage of your time, your day, your week is fighting these back orders compared to a year ago?
Good question, Hayes.
It is a great question. So I would say, and when I say my time, I'm really going to kind of bring in my buyers. We're probably still spending collectively 10 to 15 hours a week on back orders.
Wow.
Versus, and even during the height of COVID, I think it was maybe 6 to 10. It's higher now, which is crazy. So back in the day, we're talking maybe 1 to 2 hours a week before COVID happened, right?
IV fluid, something simple.
Yep. Even when Puerto Rico happened, right?
Yeah.
We at least we're all still on the same page and we knew what to do. But this is so different. And like I said, I don't think it's not just COVID, right? And it's not just manufacturing. There's a component of this that has to do with a lot of these mergers that have happened.
And Susie, just in addition to that, I want your input on, this is a mindset too. This is a mindset of how much do we keep on hand for how long now? Our quantity on hand and the shortages, those back orders are part of that too, right? Because what is it, 90 days now, 120 days? I mean, how much? And it's not just PPE. It's a lot of different supplies. What's your thoughts, Susie, on that? As the mindset's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And it's funny because, we're obviously finance people and even the higher level supply chain people have a different opinion about what we should have on hand. And I get it, because if it's in my building and I've paid for it, it's now cash that's sitting. Totally understand that. But like, for instance, DNC tubing, extremely important product to have on hand, right? So when we couldn't get it and we were literally hand making DNC tubing, once I could get it, did I order twice as much as I needed? Yes. Because I knew enough to know that they had a big production run and they were healthy, but that was only going to last a certain period of time. So it has absolutely put us into a mindset for certain things that we really can't be without. We have increased our par level, and we've had to. PPE, I probably have, depending on exactly the product, 60 days, 60 to 90, depending. But even that, if we were to have a rush of patients, that could change my number in a matter of a week, right? So it's just so hard to try to effectively plan. But the physician items, and especially items that are used in surgery, that are used in the cath lab, those are so much more critical to how we do our business. And the last thing I want to do is impact a surgery. So when we've had issues, we are definitely ordering more than we probably need at that moment in time. But it's because we're trying to hedge our bet. Are they going to be able to stay whole again? Because for instance, that DNC tubing, we seem to go through this 90-day cycle of not being able to get it. So now we're trying to stay ahead of it.
Susie, what are some of your manufacturers telling you as it relates to these back orders? Do you see it getting better? Are they giving you some forecast at all?
No, they have a little bit more, quite honestly, like on the PPE side, like, Medline's a big manufacturer of gloves, right? So we are hearing that they expect to be healthier in gloves by the fall. But a lot of them, I think, aren't committing because I don't know that they've made a commitment to change their production. In other words, if the demand was 100, or they thought the demand was 100, but then it was really 200, so then they back ordered 100 and they made 100, are they now making the decision in the next run to make 200? Or are they maybe only going to do 150 because they're still trying to make sure they don't have waste and risk another back order? I think and Justin said it earlier, they're playing their production numbers so tight, and we're paying for it. I would like to see them just open up manufacturing a little bit more, because I feel like the need is out there. The healthcare need is out there. None of us, it's been a bit since you've really seen a hospital close because they didn't have business.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah.
I don't understand why we're not learning from the challenges.
So you think your algorithm is here to stay for a while. It's going to be a necessary tool for your organization. And, the market's so volatile as you're describing. It's not the way it used to be. There are certain patterns that are emerging that are different. And there's so many things you started this conversation on, but definitely that factory staffing. They're really subject to two different variables that are not in unison. And when they happen together, meaning no materials and no staff, that's when they really run behind. And so, I just think about some things like just in time and inventory like that. Is it making it hard to take some of those approaches that you used to take in the past that maybe, health systems were running leaner with?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody could even consider truly doing just in time right now, because you would be risking, when we couldn't get safety catheters 4 months ago. How can you can't risk that. So not keeping stock in your facility, I don't think is practical. And I really haven't seen a partner come out and say, we have a better idea through all of this. Let us build these kits for you. Let us do this. I don't see that anybody's really come out with a good idea. But again, it's such a broad spectrum. It isn't just one thing anymore, right? And funny story. So I couldn't get stethoscopes and I couldn't get gowns, and there was something else. Well, I find this kit on Medline. I'm like, ooh, this is kind of cool because it's got everything in it already, like a new patient kit, right? And I was all excited about it, and I ordered them, and the order went through, and I was like, yes. And then it shipped without a gown or a stethoscope.
Oh my God.
I thought I had won. I was all proud of myself, and then it shipped without it. It was too good to be true. I'm I will never forget that day. I was so disheartened when I opened these boxes, and Medline was fantastic. They totally took them back because I'm I have everything else. I wanted those. But it's just the reality. It's such a big, broad spectrum of things that I don't know if I don't think any one company can really solve it. I think they've got to beef up their manufacturing. I really think that's where the problem lies.
Last question as we kind of wrap this up, and I like how you tied that all together, but these impacts that we're seeing with back orders, some of them really will be somewhat more short term, hopefully anyway, unless the pandemic lasts forever. And Hayes, you jinxed us earlier when you said hopefully we're on the tail end of it.
It's the new normal.
Or it's the new normal,
don't say
right?
That.
So,
no.
But the point being that, there are some short-term issues, right? Raw materials and factory staffing as we return closer to the old normal, those things will kind of resolve themselves a little bit. But I think you also described something where there's the trust factor. And so this increased demand it's going to go away later because people, even when it starts to happen, aren't going to believe it's happening. They're not going to trust it. You're going to hear for the next 5 years, if you're a manufacturer or a distributor, you're going to hear for the next 5-10 years, we can't do that or we don't want to do that because of what just happened. Right. And so, a lot of the new ideas that, might not work today are possible again in the future, but they're not going to be adopted quickly. And so there's going to be this constant demand for overstock to some extent, like you said. And so like, what issues do you think are here to stay amongst all of those? Like, do you think this will all eventually level out, or do you think there are some things that have happened that, just going to be this way for a long time?
My fear is that they like the fact that they can manufacture 100 and sell 100 and waste 0. And I think they're going to continue to try to perfect that. And I think that is going to force us to probably see back orders for a while. I think now that they've had that opportunity to actually, because it's better for them, right? 100%. If they make 100 and they sell 100, that's money in the bank. But if they make 200 and they sell 170 and they lose that money, it's not ideal. So I think they're just going to continue to try to sell 100% of what they make and be safe. And until they decide to be a little braver and make a little bit more, I think we're going to be in this for a while.
Susie, you bring up a really good comment. I'm curious to see how this will play out, because you think about it, if a manufacturer did come in and just solved your problems for back orders, they really went ahead and that waste justified the income that they sold, they may change the bar. This is going to be an interesting concept that I hope we get to talk about again, because I think you're onto something. I think you're right on.
I hope we're having a different conversation in a year from now.
I agree. I concur 100%.
I do too, for Hayes' sake.
Yeah.
Always for Hayes. It's always about Hayes.
We're going to solve this problem like that. I don't know how, but we will.
Susie, great job. Thanks for sharing your backorder algorithm. For anybody who downloads the smartphone app for iPhone and Android, I'm sure it will be quite helpful, and really just sharing your insights. What a interesting time that we're all in. And you really brought the real world day to day to the conversation today. So thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
That was Susie Collins, Director of Materials Management at Florence Hospital, a campus of Mountain Vista Medical Center, and talking about back orders. And Gary, you and I and Hayes had a long conversation after the podcast still with Susie, and I can't believe it didn't come up during the interview, but just the whole, gown recall and the things that happened right before the pandemic hit, and they seem like isolated sort of problems that we would have to deal with in supply chain. And the next thing you know, take that and magnify it how many fold. And it's been ongoing ever since. She did a really nice job really talking about what it's been like living through this process and through the situation that we've been in. But also, I love how proactive she was with it, especially around creating the algorithm so that when leadership came back to her and said, what happened? We had to have this. Dr. So-and-so is irate, whatever the complaint was, that she would know at that point that everybody on the team had been trained to a point where she had the confidence that she could say, it's just not there.
No, you're right on, Justin. I think you summed it up well. Her algorithm is going to be alive and well during this mindset, the shift that she talked about. And really, there was a giant amount of conversation. We might have to have her back, but everything else supporting that backorder algorithm, from shortages of truck drivers to the port, the issues that all kind of coincided with the pandemic, just within PPE and other items coming in. But this is not going to go away. I think she hopes we have a different conversation in a year. But what she set up within her institution and her hospital, I think, is really patient-focused. She gets it. She knows that there is not a way to have a shortage. She's got to have a solution to take care of the nurses, the surgeons, the staff, and ultimately the patients. So I thought she did a really good job. Susie did an outstanding job on that one.
Great job, Susie. That's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Power Supply by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or on your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content like the backorder algorithm for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone application for iPhone and Android. Certainly appreciate a rating and review, because your feedback is important to the show. And on behalf of Hayes and Gary and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.